Zinc industry, myself, we would like to help you. IZA. That's a beautiful project. That's an ideal location where you should use galvanizing. If something happens in the RCC column, the bread comes down. So it's better to prevent any disaster or corrosion, etc.
I think, Frank, we're running out of time now. You want to add something to that?
On this question of airports, we have a conference in Brazil, similar to this, called Galva Brazil. We had a presentation by the Brazilian infrastructure architect. I have a 60-slide PowerPoint on the use of galvanized steel in about 20 Brazilian airport terminals. If you'd like to have that, I'm very happy to send you that PowerPoint.
Yeah,
I have
please.
it with me.
You can send it to the organizers so that they can disseminate this information. So thank you very much. Very nice, very informative session which we had. I'd just like to summarize what the speakers talked about, starting with Gurpreet, Principal Architect. He gave us a good idea of how the airports and the other, be careful, yeah, and a very innovative use of vertical gardens, of skylights, and getting inspired by the bird wings. One suggestion from our side was that maybe many of the people were looking at what was the galvanized steels, what grades, what coatings, you know, because this is the other side, the architect and the manufacturers. So maybe next time onwards, if you can give us some more information of, you know, where the galvanized can be used, or what grade, what section, what coating, would have been, it will be beneficial to all of us. Thank you very much for your speech. Rajinder, of course, elaborated upon the strategies which Valmont had adopted to get into India, and it was quite good, and they followed a route where no one else had followed, so they got into the largest kettle, and he did talk about you know, galvanizing more than 16 meter long with 2.5 meter wide, and it was a good information on use of galvanizing for small poles, large poles, telecom poles, utility poles. Thank you very much for your lecture. Ashok ji obviously talked about the ERW steel pipes, and he did touch upon the future, which would be color coated steel pipes, designer pipes. He did also rake up or took up an issue of the problems which are posed with the galvanized pipe, which I think Frank had a good answer to that. He also highlighted the threat posed by plastics to pipes, and how the steel industry and the galvanized industry should work in tandem to overcome such a threat. Finally, Mr. Pugliandi obviously gave a very informative presentation on the usage of galvanizing. He also touched upon the new government being proactive, and a lot of, he took examples of like 100 smart cities in India, a dedicated freight corridor, or many new airports coming up. He elaborated upon the usage of the zinc coated steels in transmission line towers, the railway electrification, galvanized rebars, pre-engineered buildings. So that was a very comprehensive presentation, a very market-facing presentation on what are the end applications where galvanized can be used. So I thank all the speakers for a very informative session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And yes, once again, a big round of applause for the speakers and also for the chair. And now may I request our chair, Mr. Avtar Singh, to do the honors and present the mementos to our speakers for the session. And everyone, let's join our hands together as we have the honors going on. We have the memento at the start to be presented by Mr. Avtar Singh to Mr. Gurpreet Shah. Let's join our hands together. Once again, thank you, Mr. Shah, for your invaluable inputs on the architecture front. Thank you very much. We have the memento now for Mr. Rajendra Kaushal. So once again, thank you very much for all your inputs for the conference today. As we go ahead, we have the memento for Mr. Ashok Gupta. So thank you very much. Once again, everyone, a big round of applause. This was a session on public and private infrastructure, and we have the memento just in some time for Mr. Ashok Gupta. The last session for today on global market and technology trends. Memento for Mr. Ashok Gupta, and a big round of applause. And lastly, but surely not the least, for Mr. Pug, sir, thank you so much for prizing us about all the past, current, and future scenarios possible. Indeed, very enlightening. Once again, thank you so much to Mr. Avtar Singh for chairing this session. Thank you so much. Chair, with your permission, do we break for tea? Thank you. So yes, friends, as I have the consent from the chair, on that note, we invite you all to join for the tea break in the pre-function area. We request you to be back, Ruchika, what time? 4:15 p.m. That's the time that we are all meeting together for the last session for today on global market and technology trends. We shall be having amongst us Mr. Frank Goodwin and Mr. Ken D'Souza, who shall be deliberating amongst us. Thank you. Have a refreshing tea break ahead. Thank you.
In the past 40 years, 50 years, we paid huge attention to increasing production because the hunger problem was a very critical problem in the world. But during this time, while we increase the production,
ladies and gentlemen, this last session shall be focusing on global market and technology trends. It's a very interesting session because we have an esteemed panel of speakers present with us. And going ahead, I'd like to invite on the first speaker, Dr. Frank E. Goodwin. A very good evening, sir. Dr. Goodwin serves as Director of Technology and Market Development at International Zinc Association and is based at IZA's Durham, NC office. He joined International Lead Zinc Research Organization in 1982 and was Executive Vice President of ILZRO at the time of merger between ILZRO and IZA in 2004. He's earned his SM and SED degrees in Materials Engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, along with BS with distinction in Material Science and Engineering from Cornell University, Ithaca, New York. He is the author of several US and foreign patents and over 300 technical publications and contributions to books. So welcome once again. A very good evening to Dr. Goodwin and a warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, let's join our hands together to welcome Dr. Goodwin. Thank you. We have amongst us Mr. Kenneth M. D'Souza, metallurgical engineer and corrosion specialist, who comes with over nearly 4 decades of experience in the steel industry in Canada and United Kingdom in production, testing, and stamping performance of metallic and organic coated pre-painted steel, including galvanized amongst others, coated seals. Ladies and gentlemen, he is a professional engineer in the province of Ontario, responsible for product and specification development and implementation of several new coated steels for the construction and automotive market in North America. Developed business plans for the manufacture of several new metallic coated and pre-painted steels for North America, and provided engineering analysis, designs, testing, support to customers for the existing and new products. So ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed delighted to have amongst us Mr. Kenneth M. D'Souza. A very good evening, sir. Pleasure for us to have you here. Good evening, sir. Welcome. And we are delighted that this session shall be moderated by Mr. Pogsa. Please come forward and please take it on from here. So ladies and gentlemen, the last session for the conference day 1, titled as Global Market and Technology Trends. Present amongst us is our chair for the session and our distinguished speakers. On that note, I request the chair to take it on from here. Mr. Pog, please.
May I request our friends to take your seats. And volunteers, if you can get people outside the hall, let the house be full. This is going to be a very interesting session. The previous one, we saw the domestic infrastructure. Now we're going to look at the global market and technology trends. 2 knowledge banks sitting either side. One on general galvanizing. If Frank does not know anything on zinc, it's not worth knowing. I think I know him for the last 30 years, and he's very well read, knows everything about zinc, metals, various applications, can equally on sheet galvanizing. They both have been coming to India frequently. With this note, it's going to be a very lively, informative session, and I would now request Frank to take over and enlighten us on general galvanizing.
Well, thank you, Pug. It's a real pleasure to journey to Delhi and to India and join you for this first International Galvanizing Conference we're having here. And my thanks to our co-organizer, Hindustan Zinc, and all the sponsors and patrons of the conference and making this possible. It's been a huge effort, and it's a great opportunity to come and share all of our experiences together. So I've been asked to speak in this afternoon's talk about the global market and technology trends, and I'll begin by first talking about the market trends. We've heard about market trends from several of the other speakers today, and then I'll be speaking first about the global scene. We've heard much of that, and then my own thoughts about selected regions where I'm working and assisting people in different parts of the world. And then we'll move next to the technology trends, and that'll finish my presentation. So we have seen this morning about the growth of steel consumption in the world, and we have to say that the basis for any growth in galvanized steel consumption and any growth in zinc consumption in galvanized steel is the growth of steel consumption. And we really see from this slide the world is really two speeds of economies. We see the faster growing economies. If you look at the right-hand side, we see numbers over 100% growth in the steel since 2007. These are numbers that World Steel came up with just a few weeks ago. They came up with their interim report on the world situation for steel. And although we know that the world is transitioning in many developed countries to an information economy or a service economy, we still see the steel growth as a real vital sign of how world economies are doing. The world is still built on steel. Steel is a very vital part of it, so the steel statistics you see here are still very closely correlated with economic growth in every developed and developing country of the world. So we see, for example, the European Union, where the right-hand column, 71.8%, NAFTA, 98%, and Japan, 79.8%. These are developing, slower growing economies in the last few years. But yet, on the other hand, we see India at the very bottom is among the highest numbers. We see 151.8% for the 2014 over 2007 number for apparent steel consumption, as it says on the bottom. That's the World Steel calculation of this, taking into account exports, imports, and trade figures. There are other higher, the China number is just above that, and then you see some other developing country numbers that are also doing quite well. But India is now right about level with Japan. You can see they're both in the 60, 70,000. India now pulling ahead of Japan and having about a double of the growth rate of Japan in this last period. So looking very good there. And also India has moved up the rankings. These are also the World Steel numbers. You can see that in 2007, India was number 5 in World Steel usage, and now it's popped up to number 3, just behind China and the US. So that's also very impressive to see this development of steel in India. However, and of course, this is the big however, for galvanized steel, this is related to the zinc consumption per capita, and it's been already remarked earlier today that this is a much lower number. These are the latest study group figures coming out from the most recent study group reports from October of 2013. So I think these are the latest numbers that we have. But this is consistent with what we see in the other presenters' work that we've seen earlier today. There's India that is quite far down the charts if we rank it on that right-hand column of per capita zinc consumption, and we've got a long way to go to get up to the European or Japanese levels even for the use of zinc. So that's our real job here, is to work together to develop the market to grow this to up to the higher levels of the other countries. And of course, galvanized steel is half of all zinc consumption, or more than half in many parts of the world. So this is really a reflection of galvanized steel consumption. So if you look around the world, we can divide it into really 4 quadrants of very different sizes and very different growth characteristics and very different rates of zinc consumption. This is from the talk of Rick Cornish of Valmont at our zinc conference earlier this year. And we're showing here North America being the smallest of the large 3. You've got Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and Asia Pacific, which a very large part of that is, of course, China, and then South America with half a billion dollars of galvanizing market there. So these are figures for the value of the hot-dip galvanizing market. So turning now to North America, it was remarked before that we're seeing about a 25% penetration. And this is a figure, again, from Rick, showing these are the American Galvanizers Association statistics through 2012. We can, of course, here see the big bump in 2009, the Lehman crisis, and the recovery from that has gone very well. But overall, out of all the steels that the American Galvanizers Association considers to be galvanizable, including all of our structural shapes and other fabrications, about 26% are now actually hot-dip galvanized. So that's quite a good penetration rate. Of course, there's much room to grow, but the tonnage of the market is shown in North America now. We're about 13 million tons of hot-dip galvanized, that 13,200 number there. So one thing that's been very clear in North America during the last decade or so is the consolidation into a number of large groups. And we can see here there are 5 large groups. And just last week we had a press release from Valmont showing that they've acquired another one in the Minnesota area up here, Zalk where's our little pointer here? So in this area here, so there's another blue dot that's going to be up there on the updated chart. So what has happened is that we've seen from the small holding companies, the family-owned companies, they've been merged into or acquired by the other companies, and there's much a higher level of technology and professionalism and marketing as well in these larger groups. And this has been very good. This is a very good sign of growth in North America, and we can expect that the market penetration and the overall technical and commercial level of the industry in North America will grow in the future as we go forward. The basic trends in North America, what do we see there? First of all, we see continued economic recovery. It's been a slow crawl out of the recession of 2008, and this has been led by massive public investment to stimulate the economy. The hot-dip galvanizers have taken full advantage of that. There's been galvanizers who in 2009 and 10 really had the bulk of their orders coming from the public sector for roadworks and other public projects. So they said, if that's a recession, let's have some more of it. We love this stimulus money. But now, of course, that's tapering off as the economy overall grows. You're seeing more private investment, and that is going into hot-dip galvanized structures. So that's going on. The second point, our Federal Highway Administration in the USA and also some of the states now really require life cycle costing to be used to evaluate corrosion protection systems for highway and bridges. So here, of course, we're competing with paints and the ability of hot-dip galvanizing to provide a much longer life without maintenance than painted structures means that the life cycle costing numbers are looking very good, especially in the low interest rates environments that we have today. So we are seeing an increased success by the galvanizers in winning jobs for the galvanized steels for highways and bridges. There is, however, an improvement in technology, as there always will be in other competitive systems. The paints and powders are continuing their improvements in their coatings, and we can expect to have a competition with them for many, many years yet. The real growth areas have been in parking garages. We see, as in other countries, a continued urbanization rate in North America. Overall, U.S., Canada, and Mexico, there's an increased urbanization rate. So an increased car ownership, which means that cars need to be parked on top of each other, which means parking garages, and a lot of that is galvanized. Another project is short span bridges. These are shorter span bridges like the one shown in this picture. The ability to put these up in a short period of time using galvanized structurals has been a great attraction, and again, part of the infrastructure redevelopment has been taken advantage of by the galvanizers here. So we do see this as being a major driver for the growth of hot dip galvanizing, these smaller bridges. As I think was noted in a prior slide, that the cost of corrosion is very high, and the number of deficient bridges in the USA, I think if we put all the defective bridges in the U.S. end to end, they would go across the country 5 times. It's a huge number that need rehabilitation, and the galvanizing industry is taking advantage of this. In Europe, the market is 6,600,000 tons. If we go clockwise from the right, we see Germany at 30%. That's the largest market for hot dip galvanizing in Europe. And then we work around clockwise to France with 9%, Italy with 19%, Spain with 9%, UK and Ireland, sorry, 9% there, and other being 23%. And this is the EU 24. So the fastest growing bit is really that 23%. We have really seen a shrinkage, or at best a stagnation in the major Western European economies, except for Germany. Germany has continued to hold its own, but in France, Italy, Spain, and UK and Ireland, we've seen struggles for people to maintain volume. So this is a slide through 2010, but it's still valid today. Because there has been quite a stagnation in the European market. The only bar group that you can really see going up over the years is building and construction. That led the way out of the 2008 recession and is still continuing to grow. If you look at the other segments of the market, street furniture, utilities, agriculture, transport, fasteners, industrial equipment, and other, they're pretty much flat and have remained flat in all of the Western European economies. It's only in the new accession countries where you see growth within these countries of these other bars. But of course, they're much smaller than the Westerns, and so they only contribute small amounts to these bars. So as I've said, construction is the sector that's driving growth in Europe. But we do see a much smaller rate of penetration, less than 5% of steel produced. Although there's a bit of a sort through in your logic here. It has been mentioned before that the use of hot dip galvanizing is very high. The use of zinc is per capita very high. In Europe, the amount of steel actually being galvanized is 5%. So that still needs, there's this huge potential that what we find is that people do not take hot dip galvanizing for granted. The patterns of use are changing. We'll talk in the second part of this presentation about technology changes. We'll talk about the high-strength steels and special quality steels. This is influencing the market, and also our architects and engineers are innovating. They're looking for lighter and stronger and cheaper, and of course this drives them to higher strength steel. So that innovation of strength against weight means the galvanizers have challenges. So there's a need to continue moving with our moving customers. The clients we have are looking not only to galvanizing as a service, but also to logistics and other services that can be provided together with hot dip galvanizing. And we see the growth also coming from automotive. There's a number of automotive underbody applications. We'll be actually talking about that tomorrow in the automotive presentation, and some offshore wind energy applications that are looking very interesting, but they're also demanding the higher performance systems. So in China, we see 14,200,000 tons, quite large. And again, working clockwise around from the right side, 34% is in power and infrastructure. Transportation is 18%, agricultural is 2%, construction is 20%, municipal is 10%, industrial plant is 11%, fastenings 4%, and storage is 1%. So you can see the great dependence of this on the infrastructure, being the power infrastructure and the transportation. So there are 770 hot-dip galvanizing plants in China, which is a huge number, of course, and they are concentrated in the three regions. One is the Bohai Economic Ring, which is on the western end of that. You have Beijing, and it extends out to the coastline, the Bohai Bay, as it's called, which goes out to the Pacific Ocean on the east of there. And then you've got the largest group in the Yangtze Valley area, working up the Yangtze Basin from Shanghai into Hangzhou and other areas in there, 449 hot-dip galvanizer. And then are in the Pearl River area, which includes Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and the southeast corner of China. You've got 85 hot-dip galvanizers there. So it's a huge number, with the largest fraction being in the Shanghai area there. So you also see consolidation of these. The smaller galvanizers are facing increased both costs and competition. You are now paying over 3,000 renminbi a month for a Chinese laborer, and that's quite a change for these guys compared to past years. And so the increased competition with other internationally is becoming more difficult. In China, the trends, we all know about the Chinese coal-burning power plants, which make the air of poor quality. But the trouble is these all have to be connected to a grid to deliver electricity. They're building about one power plant every 2 weeks still, but they need power lines to connect them to the customers. And so the real shortage is not the power plants themselves, but it's the wires to string everybody together. So in this 5-year plan that's going on right now, there is a development of the ultra-high voltage transmission lines. This is a 1 million volt, a 1,000 kilovolt network, and this will take 70 million tons of hot-dip galvanized. That'll be required for building out the network. That won't be all done in this current 5-year plan, of course. It'll take some years, but this is a huge development. They're putting up power plants, they're putting up wind energy, windmills and other things, but they can only run the windmills 2 hours a day because otherwise the grid they have is saturated. They can't get the electricity through anyway. So this is a real bottleneck in the Chinese economy to get this electricity network done. Of course, many of the trains run on electricity as well, so they need that for the trains reasons too. But also within the railways, the high-speed train network is well under development, but also the freight lines are being developed, and these will all be electrified. They will use hot-dip galvanized, which is the China railway specification for the towers, for the catenary lines, and for other track furniture. We have a number of new stations which use galvanized structurals in some of these railway stations, which are aesthetically very pleasing. You can put hot-dip galvanized structures up that look very nice and are very pleasing as exposed galvanized, and that's what we see in these Chinese stations. We have many photographs of those, so they're quite inspirational for thinking about future architectural public places. Continued urbanization. Of course, China is urbanizing. They're going to put 100 million more people in the cities in the next years. That'll require much infrastructure development. Built form depends on steel, and to use steel outdoors, of course, we know it should be galvanized, so that'll drive it. And then wind energy. I mentioned before about wind energy, and here we see in the graph the left-hand bar, the highest bar is China wind energy construction. They're looking to get a lot more energy from wind, and this will require offshore wind structures. Every tower that's going out there is quite a few tons of steel, so a lot of steel in the water is required. You put steel in the water and it has to be protected against corrosion, which means galvanizing in many cases. So we do see these very big trends. So we don't expect the China general galvanizing activity will be slowing down or flattening for some time. Because it began a few weeks ago, and so this points out the need for the galvanizer to be a real partner with the project manager. You look at these large projects for stadiums, for airports, for other things, and the galvanizers really have to develop their partnerships, and it's much more than just dipping the steel. It's getting involved in the full design and manufacturing process from the beginning to know exactly how to galvanize these steels. We'll talk about some of the design details in a few minutes. Oil and gas in Brazil is work in progress. Petrobras is developing the third largest offshore oil project in the world, after the Gulf of Mexico and after the West Africa, Nigeria area. The Brazilian pre-salt project is a huge offshore oil area. There are many opportunities for galvanizing there, and some of these are being taken advantage. We've got a market development program with our Brazilian office with them. And also, of course, Brazil is a coastal economy. If we look back on that map, we can see really everybody lives along the coast. The color codes here, Brazil really is a coastal nation, although, of course, we think of the Amazon and everything else, but everybody really lives by the sea, which means that there's many opportunities for structures near the coast to be protected from corrosion. Things like galvanized rebar and galvanized structurals are all possible projects, and we work with the galvanizers there on that. Also, historically, Brazil's had concrete lighting poles and low voltage distribution poles in the city, and those are being converted to galvanized poles. We've got a project with the Brazilian galvanizers because that is really in need of updating. And this is just a gallery of some Brazilian projects. Porto Alegre is the southernmost big city in Brazil, going down towards Uruguay. And this museum is a white concrete museum. It's a beautiful museum right on the bay, so it's seeing the coastal environment. And this is made out of galvanized rebar. Then you've got the Rio de Janeiro Museum of Art, which was a repurposed older building. And what the wavy shape on top is a galvanized rebar thin shell, much like the Lotus Temple and the Sydney Opera House were. That's the same sort of method of construction, to have a galvanized mesh and then the concrete poured around it to make a very undulating sort of roof up there. So that's become a very popular social place. You're up in the breeze in the evening on top of this museum, and it's become a very popular and attractive place. Finally, down at the bottom, a much more utilitarian application. This is a sugar warehouse in Santos. The port of Santos is the port for Sao Paulo, and this used 220 tons of steel and 18 tons of zinc. These kinds of warehouses are very good applications for general galvanizing. So in India now, where we are, we can talk about breaking down between sheet and galvanized structurals. So Ken, we have this breakdown here. We can see how it is in India between the hot dip galv and the sheet. The lion's share being the galvanized sheet, but also in galvanized structures and on the left side, and galvanized pipe. We can see this broken down in the various markets here. So power transmission and distribution being the largest part of the galvanized structures market, and then distribution being the second part of that, so also related to the utilities and other applications. So there's, as we said before, the intensity of use of general galvanizing in India is quite low. We have other applications and infrastructure that we see as real opportunities. I think that became apparent from our last session. So and overall, the Indian galvanizing market, half of it is sheet, and then we have tube, and then the general galvanizing, and then wire. So it's a bit of a different structure than the rest of the world. So there are a number of projects going on that are that offer a great potential for galvanizing structures. This is a solar project, the Nehru National Solar Mission, and this is going out to the year 2022, as you can see. And the phase one goal, just our first goal during the next few years, is to get 150 megawatts of solar photovoltaic and another 500 megawatts of solar thermal, which means your solar heating of hot water. It's not making electricity, but it's just transferring solar power into the thermal